Wyoming Territory, 1879. The wind tasted of ash and snow when the townspeople turned their eyes on her. Keziah Thorne did not flinch when the young boy yelled, "Which face?" from behind the barrels outside the dry goods store. She just kept walking, her shawl drawn close around her shoulders. The left side of her face, burned and twisted from the fire that took her home and her parents 3 years ago, stayed turned toward the dust. She had grown used to the stares, the whispers, the way folks in Sweet Clover would stop talking altogether when she passed. They had not always been like this. Before the fire, she was the girl with the braid down her back and a laugh that carried across the pasture. Before the fire, she was engaged. But he had not come for her after. Not even once. She walked into the post office, eyes down, and paid for her parcel with coins warm from her palm. A letter from her aunt in Kansas, mostly full of prayers and polite regret. Keziah tucked it under her arm and stepped out into the morning light. That was when she heard the hooves. The rider was tall in the saddle, his coat dusty, his dark brown hair tied back in a leather cord. He slowed his horse as he passed the mercantile, eyes scanning the town like he was hunting something. Or someone. "Keziah?" His voice was low, steady. She froze. He dismounted in one smooth movement, boots hitting the ground. He tipped his hat back to reveal a face sharp with sun and time. But she knew those eyes. "Colden McRae," she said flatly. He gave her a smile that did not reach for pity. "It has been a while." 3 years, she said. "And not a single word." Colden exhaled slowly. "I thought you were dead. When I came back from Texas, they told me your parents were gone. That you had not made it out." She turned her face a little, the burned side catching the light. "Well, not all of me made it." He looked at her then, not like the others did. Not with fear or disgust or that tight-lipped sympathy that meant nothing. He just looked like he saw her. "I came back to find you," he said. Keziah's fingers gripped the edge of her shawl. "Why?" "Because I never stopped loving you." A door slammed nearby. Someone laughed sharp, cruel. "You came back for her?" A woman's voice barked. "You must be blind, Cowboy. You mind your mouth, Lydia," Colden said, his voice calm but hard enough to stop the laughter short. Keziah's chest burned. "You do not have to defend me." "I know," he said, softer now. "But I will anyway." She took a step back, then another. "You should not have come here. This town. They are waiting for me to disappear. I am not." She did not know what to say to that. He looked broader now, stronger. The boy she once loved had become a man who rode with purpose and stood like he would not be moved. But the wound inside her had scabbed over with silence and shame. She had learned not to believe in warm voices. "I do not need saving," she said quietly. "I know," he said, and his eyes did not waver. "But maybe I do." She blinked. "I have not found peace since I left here," he went on. "Everywhere I went, I kept seeing you. I kept thinking, if there is any way she is still breathing, then I have to find her. And now that you have, I want to make things right. You cannot fix this." Her voice cracked. "You cannot undo what they see." He took a step closer. "I do not care what they see. I see you." That night, the wind whistled through the slats of the boarding house where Keziah rented her narrow room. She sat by the window, her needle paused in a patch of mending, and stared out over the darkened street. He had meant it. She could tell. Colden had always said what he meant, even when they were children playing hide and seek in the tall summer grass behind the Thorne farm. He was the boy who gave her a daisy crown and said she looked like spring. The boy who kissed her once by the creek and promised her a cabin of their own someday. Before the fire. Before her face became a reason for people to cross the street. She heard a soft knock. She opened the door to find Colden holding a wooden box. "I carved this for you." He looked sheepish. "It is not much, but—" She opened the box. Inside was a small mirror. maple-framed, polished. Simple, but kind. Her chest tightened. Why would you give me this? Because I want you to see what I see. She set the box on the table and stepped back, unsure. Can I take you somewhere tomorrow? He asked. Just outside town. No one else. Just you and me. She nodded before she could stop herself. The next morning, Colden met her with a horse gentle enough for her to ride side saddle. He helped her up without hesitation, his hand warm at her waist. They rode in silence for a while, past the edge of the town, past the judgment and the names. The hills rolled out in soft waves, and the sun lit her hair like copper. He led her to a quiet bend in the river, where the grass grew high and the cottonwoods leaned like old friends. Why here? She asked. This is where I first knew I loved you. Keziah looked down at her gloved hands. I am not the same girl. I know, Colden said. And I am not the same boy. But my heart has not changed. She turned to him then, and for the first time in years she let someone see her without turning away. Her scarred cheek, the creased skin that would never smooth again, she let it show. He stepped closer. And with a tenderness that made her breath catch, he lifted her hand and pressed it to his chest. You are my heart now, he said simply. Keziah's eyes filled, but she did not look away. Not this time. And for the first time since the fire, the weight in her chest loosened. She did not know what would come next. But she knew this, she was not alone anymore. The wind quieted as the river bent southward, and Keziah stood with her hands deep in the wool of her skirt, watching the cottonwoods stir. Colden had gone to tether the horses farther up the slope, leaving her alone in the hush. The sky was the pale blue of early spring, and the ground, though thawing, still held the chill of winter underneath. She turned toward the water. The current moved slow here, and she crouched to touch it. Her fingers came away cold. The burned scar on her cheek pulled faintly with the movement, but she didn't wince. Not anymore. Footsteps approached through the grass. They're settin' up for Founder's Day, Colden said, stopping beside her. Saw the bunting goin' up near the church steeple this morning. She stood. I don't go to those. His gaze stayed on the river. I figured. Still, seems a thing towns do to feel proud of themselves. They like to forget who built the place with their hands torn open. Her voice held no heat, only plainness. He nodded slowly. My uncle used to say a man's pride don't always fit his memory. Keziah pulled her shawl tighter. What are you going to do in Sweet Clover? Hadn't decided, he said. I've been on the move so long, I near forgot what it means to stay in one place. She watched the horses in the distance, tails swishing at flies. There's not much work here. I don't mind worn boots, Colden said. I could break horses again. There's a widow on the east ridge with a barn half sunk in mud. Might offer to put it right. She glanced at him then. That would put you close. I was hoping it would. They walked upriver together, the soft earth giving under their steps. Keziah paused near a fallen log and sat, brushing bits of bark from her skirt. Colden leaned against a juniper trunk, arms loosely crossed. My mother used to bring me here, she said eventually. She'd pack bread and salt pork and a little jar of cherry preserves, and we'd wade in the shallows while my father fished. He didn't answer, just listened, his eyes steady. She braided my hair in 2 plaits and tied them with blue ribbon, she said. I used to think if I stayed in that water long enough, I'd come out shining. The silence stretched between them, not heavy, just quiet. I never learned to fish, she said finally. I could teach you, Colden offered. If you'd let me. She looked away. You need patience. I've got plenty. I waited 3 years. Her eyes met his. She didn't smile, not quite, but her shoulders eased. Back in town, the afternoon light had softened, and the streets carried the scent of baking and horses. Keziah led the way through the alley behind the smithy, where stray cats hunted between crates and old tools leaned along the wall like sleeping men. She stopped outside a small house with flaking white paint and a porch that listed slightly to one side. "This is mine," she said. "Aunt Clara left it to me." Colden studied the porch rail, then the crooked shutter. "Needs some fixing. I do what I can. I could help." She tilted her head. "You'd work for nothing?" "No," he said. "I'd work for supper and your company." She hesitated, then reached for the latch. "I can offer beans and cornbread." "That'll do." Inside, the place smelled of soap and dried lavender. Keziah lit the lamp with practiced hands, the flame casting long shadows. Colden hung his hat on the peg by the door and stood, unsure, in the small space between the table and the stove. "You can sit," she said. He did. She moved deftly, stirring the pot, slicing the loaf, setting 2 tin plates down with a quiet clink. When they sat, her hands stayed folded in her lap for a moment before she reached for the spoon. "Did you ever marry?" she asked. "No, why not? I never met another woman I wanted to build a life with. Not after you." She didn't answer, only chewed slowly and looked at him across the flickering lamplight. "I thought of you in the dry seasons," he said. "When the dust blew through the cracks in the bunkhouse. You were always there, just out of reach." Keziah's voice was low. "I thought of you when the frost crept through the window panes. I told myself I hated you. I would have deserved it." She shook her head. "I was angry at death. Not you." They ate in silence for a while, the kind that comes when two people have said what needed saying and are still working out where it leaves them. After the dishes were washed and stacked, Colden stood near the hearth. "I'll be working on that barn tomorrow," he said. "If you care to walk out that way." "I might." He nodded, reached for his hat, and paused at the door. "You never stopped being the woman I meant to marry." Keziah didn't move. "People will talk. Let them." When the door closed behind him, she stood in the middle of the room for a long time, her hand resting on the back of the chair he'd sat in. The lamp hissed gently, and outside, the town exhaled its nighttime quiet. She didn't feel hidden anymore. Not entirely. By late March, the thaw had spread fully through the valley, coaxing green from the stubborn earth. Colden stood knee-deep in the widow's flooded barnyard, coaxing a bent beam into place with slow, patient effort. The boards were damp, but the work was honest, and it kept his hands busy long enough to quiet the ache that rose whenever he thought of Keziah alone in that tilted house. She came just before dusk, walking the long track past the creek's bend with a basket looped over one arm. Her stride was sure, her chin lifted. Colden saw her before she called out, but didn't let on. He waited till she was close enough to see the sweat on his brow and the damp at his collar. "You missed supper," she said, setting the basket on the edge of a hay bale. "So I brought it to you." He wiped his palms on his trousers. "I was hoping you might." She unpacked carefully salted pork, boiled potatoes, and a wedge of hard cheese wrapped in waxed cloth. He watched her kneel to spread the cloth on a dry patch of plank. The light caught the edge of her jaw, and he saw the way her fingers moved, quick, deliberate. "I passed the church on my way here," she said once they'd sat down, legs stretched out in front of them. "They're putting up a stage." He bit into the potato. "For the singing, probably. Someone asked if I'd donate a cake for the auction." He looked at her sidelong. "Will you?" She folded a corner of the cloth between her fingers. "I haven't decided. Might not be welcome, even if I did." "You'd be welcome by me." Her gaze dipped down, then back up. "You'd bid on a cake you haven't tasted?" "I'd bid on it blind." A pause passed between them, wind tugging gently at her sleeves. "I used to think I'd never want to be seen again," she said. "Now I'm starting to wonder what it might feel like to be looked at without shame. You want to walk beside me, Keziah, you do it. And we'll let the town figure out what to make of it." She studied his face. "You're not afraid of being mocked?" "I've been called worse than a fool in love." She looked at the barn behind him. "You finished the roof?" "Just about. Widow Haskett's offered me a cot in her loft till I find a place of my own." She's nearly 80. She's also got a shotgun and a sense of humor. Keziah laughed, soft and brief. I've got a small back room. Meant for sewing. Could be made into something more. He watched her as the words settled between them. Are you asking me to stay? I don't want to keep standing still while life passes in front of me. He reached over and took her hand, calloused and warm from the walk. Then let's build something that moves forward. She didn't pull away. That evening, Colden walked her back to her house beneath a sky pricked with early stars. They didn't speak much, but the silence was easy now. Familiar. When they reached her step, she turned to face him. I've never had someone say they loved me and mean it after seeing me as I am now. I don't love you despite it, he said. I love you through it. With it. She stepped closer, and he didn't move. Her hand found the front of his coat, fingers resting lightly over the worn buttons. I want you to come back tomorrow, she said. And the day after. I will. He leaned in then, not hurried, not unsure. She met him halfway, and when their foreheads touched, her breath trembled, but she didn't shy away. The lamp in her window stayed lit long after he'd gone, casting a soft glow over the porch rail. Inside, she stood by the stove, one hand resting on the table, the other pressed to her chest. Not from pain. From something blooming slow and warm where the ache used to be. Colden, walking the road back to the barn, carried the weight of quiet joy in his chest. Not the loud kind. The kind that settles into a man's bones and makes him want to stay. The days lengthened, bleeding into one another with the soft rhythm of early April, warm enough that the ground no longer crunched underfoot, but not yet bloomed. Keziah rose before sunup now, her hands busy with water-drawn bread dough and the quiet scrape of the fire poker. Colden had moved into the back room 2 nights ago, after she offered it with a nod and no explanation. He didn't ask for one. He rose with the same silence, pulled on his boots near the stove, and carried his weight like a man who'd chosen his place and meant to stay in it. Over breakfast, he scraped honey onto a biscuit and said, Sheriff asked if I'd help at the stock pens come Monday. There's a cattle drive coming through. She poured him coffee. You'll take it? Seems fair. I'll be home before supper. She folded her arms. You say that like this is your home now. He looked at her without blinking. It is. Later that day, Keziah walked the path behind the churchyard, arms full of cuttings she'd taken from the lilac bush by Widow Ashby's gate. The roots of the town ran through this path, stones laid by hand, weeds stubborn in the seams. She knelt near one of the empty lots where the old Thorne barn once stood and pressed the cuttings into the soil. Her palms came away stained, but she didn't mind. Colden found her there after the sun dipped low, a wind rising up from the south. You planting something? He asked. She straightened. Lilac. They won't bloom this year, but next spring they might. He stood with his hands tucked into his coat. You want to build here again? No, she said. But I don't want it to stay empty either. He crouched beside her, the quiet of dusk settling between them. I stopped by the tailor's today, he said, voice low. He's making me a new shirt. Said I ought to look decent for the Founders' Day dance. She didn't look at him. You planning to go? I was hoping you might come with me. You think they'd let me through the door? I don't care who tries to stop you. I'll see you through it. Her fingers brushed a clump of earth from her skirt. I haven't danced since before the fire. I have, he said. But never with the person I wanted. She rose, brushing her palms clean. Then I hope you like bruised toes. He smiled faintly. I'll take the risk. The week passed in steady hours mending, hauling water, clearing out the back shed. Colden found her one morning standing by the hearth, reading from a small book with its corners worn soft. What's that? He asked. Poems, she said. My mother's. You read them aloud? Not since she died. He leaned against the doorway. Would you? She hesitated, then opened the book. Her voice was steady, low, pulled tight as thread. The poem was about prairie wind and hope stitched into linen. When she finished, she closed the book and held it for a moment longer before setting it aside. He didn't speak. He stepped forward and touched her wrist, light as a breath. She didn't pull away. That night, he carved her a hair comb from a length of hickory. No decoration, just smooth lines and steadiness. He set it by the lamp before turning in, said nothing about it in the morning. She found it and slipped it into her hair without a word. On the evening of the Founders' Day celebration, Keziah stood in front of the mirror Colden had given her. She wore a dress she'd sewn herself, pale green with a high collar and crisp cuffs. The comb held her hair back from her face, and though her scars remained, she didn't lower her gaze. He waited outside in his new shirt, collar stiff, boots brushed clean. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Always." They walked side by side to the church hall, where lanterns threw gold light across the walls and the sound of fiddles drifted through the open doors. The crowd turned when they entered, voices falling off. Colden didn't stop. He kept her hand in his, walked her straight to the middle of the room, and waited for the music to start. When it did, he moved with care, letting her lead when she needed to, never pushing, never rushing. Her hand was warm in his. They danced 3 songs before she excused herself for air. Outside, the wind had softened. She leaned against the railing, looking out across the flickering lamplight. He joined her quietly. "You want to head home?" She shook her head. "Not yet." He looked out across the field. "They watched us." "I know. They'll keep watching. I don't care." He turned to her. "You're not that girl I kissed by the creek," he said. "I know. You're more," he said. "And I love what you've become." She looked at him, her face steady. "Then let's get married." He blinked. "You mean that?" "I do." Colden reached for her hand, held it to his chest. "So do I." And when he kissed her, she didn't tremble. She leaned into it, into him, into the life they were building, one step, one dawn, one long-held breath at a time. The wedding was held in the small meadow behind Widow Haskett's barn, just beyond the reach of town eyes. Colden cleared the space by hand, cutting back the brush and hammering together benches from leftover lumber. Keziah hemmed her dress from muslin she'd traded for with 2 jars of her summer preserves. She wore her mother's brooch pinned at the collar, and didn't veil her face. They said their vows beneath a cottonwood just coming into leaf, with the wind steady and the sun warm enough to coax color into the grass. Reverend Ellerby came without fuss, though some townsfolk had whispered about it. Colden didn't invite them. Keziah didn't want them. Only those who mattered stood witness: Widow Haskett, the tailor's wife, the young boy from the dry goods store who'd once taunted Keziah but now kept his eyes lowered and offered a hand-picked bouquet. Colden clasped it without blinking and tucked it in the crook of Keziah's arm. Afterward, they shared bread, pickled carrots, and a pie sweetened with molasses. Colden lifted her hand as they walked through the short grass, the gold band he'd traded for shining dully in the light. Her eyes didn't water, but her fingers gripped his like she meant to never let go. They returned home as the sky turned to a pale wash of dusk. The porch had been swept clean, and a small iron pot of violets waited by the door, a quiet gift from someone who hadn't signed a name. Keziah paused, crouched to press her fingers to the soil. Inside, he set his hat on the peg. She unpinned her collar and hung the muslin dress where the light could reach it. Either of them spoke for a while. "Keziah," Colden said, pulling off his boots by the fire, "I've been offered a share in a cattle lot east of town. Just a few head and a stretch of fence, but it's honest work." She set a kettle on the stove and turned toward him. "Do you want it?" "I do. But only if we can build something from it together." She leaned her hip against the table. "I've been thinking of starting a boarding school for girls. Nothing grand, just reading, numbers, handwriting. There are families out here with daughters and no place for them to learn." He rubbed his jaw. "You'd be good at that. I'd need a second room. A chalkboard. Maybe some desks." He stood and crossed to her, took her hand again. "Then we'll build it. We'll build whatever you need. Spring deepened. Colden, fenced and branded, came home with dust in his eyelashes and the smell of sun in his shirt. Keziah cleared the back parlor, took in 2 girls from the edge of town whose father had been lost to a mine collapse. She taught them letters and how to read weather in the clouds. Sometimes, when the wind slowed and the stove burned low, they sat on the porch together. He carved small toys for the neighbors' children. She stitched names into muslin squares for her students. Their silences were full now, not with what hadn't been said, but with comfort. In early June, Keziah discovered she was carrying their child. She told him in the garden, her hands dark with soil and her apron smeared with the sweetness of crushed mint. He looked at her for a long moment before kneeling and pressing his forehead to her belly, reverent. "I'll build us a cradle," he said, "and a rocking chair, and a roof that doesn't let in a single drop." That summer, they painted the porch rails. He built shelves for her books. She embroidered curtains with tiny blue birds. The girls she taught brought her pressed flowers and stories they'd made up on their walks home. Colden came in evenings with his hands calloused and his back aching, but always with a smile tucked at the corners of his mouth. They didn't go to church often, but when they did, they sat side by side, and no one dared look away. The baby came in February, just before dawn, with snow piled thick against the eaves and the wind sharp as a blade. Keziah labored in the back room, gripping Colden's hand until her nails left crescent moons in his skin. The midwife, arms steady and voice calm, placed the child in her arms and whispered, "A boy. Strong." Colden wept then, not loud, not broken, just quiet, full tears that fell into Keziah's hair as he held them both. They named him Elias, after her father. Come spring, Colden built a cradle of pine and carved a songbird into its headboard. Keziah hung dried lavender above it, and every night, they watched their child sleep. The town softened. Not all at once, not always kindly. But children waved when Keziah passed, and women stopped to ask after her school. Colden's cattle business grew steady. When he walked through the square, folks nodded. One late summer afternoon, Keziah stood in the doorway of her classroom, chalk dust on her palms, and watched Colden ride up with Elias in the crook of his arm, laughing at something only a father could find funny. She stepped down from the porch, took the child from him, and kissed her husband's cheek. "I've never been so full," she said. He touched her shoulder, warm and solid. "And I've never been so home." They stood in the yard, the sun dipping low, their son safe between them, and the sound of crickets rising through the grass. Behind them, the schoolhouse waited, and beyond that, the hills rolled out like a promise. Their life was not grand, but it was theirs. Forged from scar and silence, built with patience, kept steady by love that didn't fade or falter. And they were happy. Entirely.